but it is challenging to sit down, at the beginning of every month or, the beginning of each week and plan out your schedule and figure out when you're going to fuel, figure out when you're going to go easy, when are you going to go hard? Like that is where the effort, you're going to be better served at putting your effort in that way, as opposed to kind of the stereotypical, like, I'm not working hard enough because I'm not dripping sweat after my run kind of thing.
Hey guys, it's Corey from Redefining Strength. Welcome to the Fitness Hacks Podcast. Today I want to share an episode for runners. Whether you're an endurance athlete, running is your passion, or you tend to turn to running when you want to achieve body recomposition, lose weight, I want to share some tips so that you can improve your running performance, but also reach your other goals. Because it's hard sometimes to find the balance between the two. And especially if you love running, it's hard to do things outside of the activity you love, even though you know they might benefit your actual training. So I want to discuss both nutritional strategies and workout strategies to help you do more of what you love while balancing those other goals. And I'm excited to have on one of my amazing coaches, Pamela, to really discuss what it takes to see the best results from your running, because she is an amazing endurance athlete herself and loves guiding runners on their journeys. So we'll jump into all of that, but I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who has left a review. It really helps me keep these episodes sponsorship free. So if you haven't yet, please jump on over and leave a review for the podcast. All right, let's jump right in. Sometimes to do more of what you love, you have to do things you don't like. So I equate this to the line of, like, if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. Well, I don't like that line because I think it's false, okay? I think if you love what you do, you're willing to do all the things you don't like to do more of what you love to do. And the same thing can be said for activities and sports that we love. If you are a runner, if running is your passion, if you are an endurance athlete and you want to be doing this till your final day on the planet, I salute you and support you. Do I think you're a little crazy? Maybe a little bit, because I'm not a runner myself, but I support that because I have my own passions that I always want to pursue. But I realize that it takes me sometimes stepping back and doing things I don't like in order to do more of what I love. And so I really want you to embrace this mindset when you're thinking about how you're going to get better at your running, at your sport, right? Think about all the things outside of it that maybe you don't love as much, okay? Maybe it's the strength work, maybe it's the warm up, maybe it's even changing your fueling and increasing your protein intake. What are some things you know will pay off, but that you don't enjoy as much? And in thinking about these things, the more you can remind yourself of why they are so important to getting to do more of what you love, the more you're going to embrace doing them. Because if we don't embrace doing them, we're setting ourselves up for failure. If you're skipping your warm up, it might be why aches and pains are adding up. And in the process of skipping that warm-up, sure, that 5 minutes you might not want to spend, that 10 minutes you might not want to spend before your run because you might be short on time. But if you do, you get to do more of what you love, right? You won't be out with injury. You'll be able to train as hard as you want. There are so many things that pay off. And I think it takes sometimes stepping back and even reminding yourselves of why we're doing these outside things and how they help us do our passion more. That is really key. So if you don't like doing your warm-up, instead of just skipping it, saying I'm short on time, even write out on the warm-up, I am doing this because this is going to help keep that IT band issue away, okay? So remind yourself of why these things are so important, but take that step back and realize that to do more of what you love, you have to do these other things. You have to focus on protein to build that lean muscle mass. You have to get a little sore potentially from a new strength workout routine, which might negatively impact your runs for a little bit so that you can end up getting better at your running. Sometimes we have to take that step back in order to get better. But remember, to do more of what you love, you have to embrace the mindset of doing some of the things you don't like. It doesn't mean, as I said, like, getting to or loving what you do doesn't mean that you love every moment of it, okay? To do more of what you love, you have to do things you don't like. So really making sure that you're embracing this mindset as you're starting to schedule in other things that I'm going to go through in this podcast to really help you improve your running. So just remember, you're not going to like everything that you have to do, but ultimately it will help you do more of what you love. I'm super excited to share some amazing tips from my coach and an endurance athlete herself, Pamela. She's gonna share 3 key things if you wanna improve your running, get more out of all of your training, even improve your fueling, whether you truly are, competing and wanting to take your running to the next level in PR, or even if you're just starting out and you're getting into it for aesthetic reasons. But her tips are super amazing and I'm super excited to share them with you. So let's jump right in. I'm super excited to chat with Pamela, one of my amazing coaches today, about all the things you runners need to be doing and some of the things you don't necessarily like doing, but all the things that will actually make you better runners. So thank you, Pamela, for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I love any excuse to talk about running, so I'm glad to do it. But yeah, I mean, if you run, you're a runner. So it's not even necessarily people that kind of recognize themselves as a runner, because I think we're going to get into some themes and some into some concepts that you might think like, oh, I just run occasionally, or I'm not training for a marathon or something like that. But you don't have to look a certain way. You don't have to run a certain pace or a certain distance to actually be a runner. So I just kind of want to think about that. And if you do run at all, you can benefit from all of these same topics. And then from the reverse perspective, if you do, if you are someone who considers yourself like a really intense runner, you love to run, there are really three main things that I'm going to kind of delve into a little bit deeper that are extremely important to focus on, even if we don't want to do them. The main ones, I'll go into a little bit more detail, but the main ones are prioritize easy running. Not necessarily, I'm not saying slow running. There is no slow running. There's just different degrees of fast or fast, slower, or faster, not necessarily slow or fast. And ultimately, it's all about effort. It's not so much about that actual pace. And the other thing is prioritize fueling. And then the third one is lifting, and preferably lifting on the heavier side rather than kind of always focusing on the higher reps, lower weight. So those are the three main ones that runners fight against all the time.
And it's hard because we do want to do more of what we love, but in order to do more of what we love, which for me is not running, but that's a whole other story. But to do more of what we love, we do have to embrace some of these outside things. And I think even having that mindset shift is the hardest part, right? It's not necessarily even the habits, it's the mindset shift, which was why I thought it was so interesting you brought up like easy running. It's not that it's like you're not pushing yourself, but it's a different pushing yourself. And I think that mindset shift can be really challenging.
Right. It takes a lot of effort in other ways to run easy. Like, for example, I run with a run group a lot. And oftentimes, because I train differently than them, oftentimes I'm running alone. I start with the group, but I'm running alone, or I really have to plan my easy running around like with a schedule and kind of really lean into that, which is challenging in a different way. But you can't always just push, push, push. I think in the lifting world, it's more easily embraced that you're not going to go into a weight room every single day and try to 1 rep max a squat, whether you're an experienced lifter or a new lifter, because that just doesn't make sense. I think it's more embraced that you're going to potentially do a posterior day one day, an anterior day in the next day, have a rest day in there. It's a lot more, well, it can be complicated for sure. I think it's more accepted that that's the way we train. But with runners, I don't know if it's an ego thing or just runners are stubborn. So I think that combination, and then you can get away with it a little bit more in running. If you are a newbie lifter, if we throw a bunch of weight on and throw a barbell on your back, the likelihood that you're going to get injured is pretty high pretty quickly. As opposed to running, you can get away with more intense running or that moderate level running. You can get away with it a little bit longer. So I think that's where that stubbornness comes into, because we do progress initially, even with not running easy. But if we're constantly in that middle ground or training too intensely, our body's just never able to recover. We're not able to build that aerobic engine that we need to build.
So in terms of what easy running actually is, can you dive into that a little bit more so that someone can understand how that might fit into their routine and why it's really important?
Sure. So that's a tough one because it's so person specific. But oftentimes you might hear heart rate kind of thrown around. It's usually 60 to 70% of your max heart rate. But what does that mean? We might have a Garmin on our wrist or a heart rate monitor around our chest, but some of that data isn't always accurate. And sometimes we just kind of want to go by feel. So some of it is just experience, playing with different paces and seeing how that feels and seeing how that potentially translates to a race or over time. So that's piece of it. Conversational, if you are running with someone else, talking with them. And I'm not talking about like, I have a sentence and then I need to like collect myself for a while. I'm like, full on talking, full sentences, not getting gasping out of breath, not kind of I'm walking up the staircase and I have to kind of regroup all the time. So that can be really beneficial. And then also just kind of after the fact, like, of course, you're going to make mistakes. We make mistakes in our training. We're not perfect. We're not machines. So kind of after the fact, after a run, reassess, like, do I feel that was supposed to be an easy run? Do I feel sometimes almost better? Like if it's a true recovery run, you actually want to feel better after the run than you did going into the run. Same, if you're doing more of like a prehab workout or a mobility type workout when you're, heavy lifting or into strength training. So it's kind of a similar concept as sometimes you want your body to actually feel better after the fact.
And how would you recommend someone would schedule these things in and embrace the mindset of putting them actually in? Because whether you're a runner or a lifter, it can be hard to let yourself off the hook and do less to realize it will actually lead to more.
Yeah, my favorite, and it's been life changing for me personally and for people that I've worked with. I love to train by time and effort rather than pace and distance. I think it because if you have, 5 miles on your schedule, well, that can mean whether it's a workout or an easy run, that puts a lot of pressure on you. I have a toddler. I need to tell my husband, after work, if he's getting off, I want to be like, hi, can you watch my baby for 60 minutes? Can you watch the baby for 60 minutes as opposed to 5 miles? Like he doesn't know what 5 miles means, right? And also that puts a lot of pressure on me to maybe I'm feeling extra tired. Maybe you've had a hard week or you had an intense workout the day before and you really do need to go easy, but you have 5 miles on your schedule. That puts a lot of pressure on you or on your partner or whoever's, in your life, everything you have going on. It puts so much pressure on you and you end up running harder than you should, as opposed to, okay, I've got 60 minutes on my schedule. I'm going to be gone for 60 minutes and I'm going to be back and then go from there. So that time piece I think is so crucial. And then also, even when you're doing something more intense, so even if you're doing a workout, think really training by effort. And again, some of that comes with experience that we already mentioned, but training by effort rather than constantly worrying about pace. Your body doesn't care. Your body doesn't care that you're going 8-minute pace. It doesn't care that you're going 10-minute pace because it's all relative on that day from hydration, how hot it is out, how big of a hill you're climbing. If you're going downhill, all of those factors play into it. So it doesn't care that your body doesn't care that you're going 8 minutes versus that 10 minutes. It's about the effort that's involved. So kind of shifting your mindset away from the distance and the constantly worrying about pace versus time and effort. So even if you do have a Garmin watch, obviously kind of keeping track of your mileage, that's really helpful, but you can even like change your screen. I never look, I don't even have it, on my watch, my pace ever. I only look at the time and I only look at my heart rate typically.
I love that you're using data and looking at it in a different way to allow yourself to meet yourself where you're at more. And this applies not only to running and even using the easier runs to balance everything out, but even our fueling, right? I know we often think about data with fueling, tracking as something people do for only weight loss or only gaining muscle, but it's so beneficial if you want to improve your performance and make sure that you're continually seeing those PRs in races. With fueling for running, how do you make sure that you're fueling sufficiently for performance, but then potentially even balancing in those aesthetic goals if you do have them?
Yes. So tracking is so key. It can be really, really helpful. So obviously, if you potentially have a history of overly restricted eating or something like that, and that does tend to show up a little bit more in the running community, certainly, and focusing more on the aesthetic goals. So if it doesn't work for you in that perspective, there are other ways to go about it. But if a lot of people, they're accidentally underfueling. They're not purposely restricting their calories. They don't even realize because, well, if you're incorporating a little bit of running here and there, 20 minutes here and there, maybe after a lift or something like that. Okay. Not huge energy demands. But if we're talking about training for 10Ks, half marathons, ultra marathons, triathlons, all of that stuff, it is huge energy demand, more than you probably even think. And while our body adjusts and we become fitter and essentially kind of the metabolic demands lessen, we end up working even harder though, because our body is that much fitter. So, and also if you fuel correctly, your body is going to adapt to that fuel. So if you're constantly under fueling, you could run, I've done it before. I've just like you, with your training and stuff, learning from your own mistakes. I've learned from my own mistakes. I've run an entire marathon with zero water and zero fuel. And while I finished, I didn't feel great at the end. And I certainly did not get as much out of my performance as I could have gotten. But my body adapts. My body was able to run 26.2 miles on no calories because I would get digestive issues and I got nervous. And so I just wouldn't eat during my runs. But now that I've, tracked and increased my calories and focused on increasing protein and carbs, it's amazing how much that data really helps and kind of even either planning it in advance so that you can really kind of maybe the day before a long run or something like that, your carbs are a little bit higher. or even just reflecting back. Okay, as I start tracking, I'm, increasing my training, or I'm training for something in particular. And then after each run, or maybe weekly, you can look back at your food logs and be like, okay, where was my protein? Where were my carbs? Where was my fat? And how did I feel? How did I feel kind of after those runs or after that training cycle? Can be really beneficial.
And it does give you the power to adjust too, because just like you wouldn't hold back your runs and not increase your mileage, you wouldn't necessarily hold back your calorie increase as your mileage increases. So by tracking, you can always meet yourself where you're at as your workouts progress or adapt, even when you're adding in the strength work, right? Like the whole strength thing, like I know sometimes it's like, I just want to run, but if you are looking to improve your performance, you want to add that lean muscle. But as you add that lean muscle too, you need to eat more to keep supporting it. Otherwise, you're just going to end up seeing your runs slightly diminish the muscle that you've worked so hard, and potentially even sacrifice some running to really build. So it's remembering that you're meeting yourself where you're at as you're tracking, to give yourself power to adjust as your training changes too.
Right. And it might even be too, as you are kind of trying to increase your calories and kind of figure out where that works, it might even be where you maybe focus on just either a percentage of protein, but since your calories are in flux, that's a little bit difficult. So what I found can be really beneficial for both myself and runners that I coach is really focusing on that protein minimum, typically a gram per pound of body weight, but that can be different, obviously, especially if you're in more intense training, but focusing on that. And then after that, and fueling around your training. And then the rest of the day, while intuitive eating can be really difficult, I can go into that in a moment with running, it makes it even more challenging. But I do find that for me personally, sometimes I'm off. Sometimes I don't. Maybe my run was a little bit more challenging, or maybe my mileage was a little bit higher than I was planning. And so I can't stick to that calorie kind of goal that I had. I need to eat more, but I know that I'm just going to run better the following day. And that my body composition is just going to improve if I'm really kind of listening to my body and meeting that protein minimum needs.
I think that's a really key point too, the protein focus right there that you mentioned, because we do talk a lot about carb intake, and it's so key. And I want to touch on this because I think with, people often even getting into running for aesthetic changes, like they think I need to do more cardio, they're also trying to do that while they're trying to follow, which is one of the more popular diets right now, a low carb diet. And that can be have a negative impact, right, on the actual results they want to see, not only for their running performance improving, but their aesthetic changes. So you mentioned the protein being important, and I want to talk a little bit more about why that is key, but also why carbs are key if you are looking for those aesthetic changes, not to mention having the fuel to actually run as efficiently as possible.
Right. It's one of the biggest keys because, our body's preferred fuel source is carbs, like especially the higher the intensity. So, especially that's why we also encourage, that kind of goes back to that encouraging easy running, because you want to try to stay as much as you can in that, it's called a sub-aerobic threshold. So, that point where you are burning primarily fat, the lower intensity of walking, and then really, really easy running. So that's why you want to kind of stay in that area, because then you're sparing your carbs and you're saving that for more intense training. But as you get more and more intense racing, training faster, training harder, and just longer, because your body can only store so many carbs in your glycogen in your muscles. You burn through it throughout the week, and it's pretty easy to burn through it. It takes a lot to get it back in, to get it back into those muscles. So carbs are not only a great energy source, but they're also protein sparing, because if we get to the point of too much glycogen depletion, then we're going to, at some point, you kind of run out of fat too. We always have some fat, but in our body, no matter how lean you are, but that takes a long time to metabolize that fat and to kind of turn it into energy. So what the body does is then it turns to protein, and it both, dietary protein, which then can have, negative effects in the future as well. But even worse, it turns to our actual muscle. So that's why cardio is catabolic, because it will ultimately break down your muscle, especially if you're not fueling enough, both from a caloric perspective, but also from a carb and then protein perspective.
Yep, and then you're going to end up seeing your body recomp not happen the way that you like, your performance decrease. So it's so important that even if you're coming into increasing your cardio for an aesthetic reason, that you make sure that you get sufficient carbs, and you don't just think, hey, as tempting as it is, and as much as we can see fast results with depleting our glycogen stores and losing water weight to see the scale change fast, we need those carbohydrates. And we especially need them if we are also adding in that strength work, right, to build the lean muscle. So I want to talk a little bit about that because I think this can be the biggest point of contention when you're trying to push a runner to sometimes do the weightlifting. Like they see the value, but so how did you get yourself really involved in lifting weights, and how do you talk to your running clients about lifting more and the benefits they're going to see in terms of their performance?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge from a performance perspective and an aesthetic perspective. So it's kind of cool that it can go from both angles because, like you said, some people are coming into running more from a weight loss perspective, but then some people are coming in from performance. So it's going to help so much, especially from an injury prevention. And that, getting your glutes involved, activating kind of all your muscles all the way through, not just your lower body, but your core and then your upper body as well. But so running is kind of is a full body activity, even though we constantly think of it as our lower body. So from that perspective, it's huge. And then also from the more aesthetic side of things, like we've talked about, running is catabolic. So you need something, you need the protein and you need the resistance training to counteract kind of the negative aspects. Cardio has so many amazing aspects to it. It's heart health, social outlet. It's fun for some people. It allows you to listen to podcasts and to listen to music, to get away from everything, to be outdoors, all of that. I mean, I'm a huge fan, so I know all the positive aspects, but there are some negative aspects, especially from an aesthetic perspective, potentially, if you don't counteract with strength training and with increasing your protein intake.
I think that can be said with everything, right? There has to be a balance of finding things you love and also finding things that work you towards your goals. So in terms of this, how do you convince a runner, and I'm going to say convince in this case, how do you convince a runner to embrace strength training? Because, and I bring this up because I think I even see this with like lifters too, where they don't want to do something outside of their training specifically because they feel like, oh, I'm sore from this now. Therefore, other things are being impacted in that transition into it. Obviously, we adjust and adapt, but in that initial phase where you're going to be more sore adding in the strength work, and that's going to negatively impact your runs, how do you embrace involving something that's detracting also in a weird way from the things that you love?
Sure. Well, you can be creative, like you mentioned, kind of about your scheduling, which I can talk about in a moment. But also, that's where the easy effort running comes into play. Like, it doesn't really matter, how you feel. Maybe if your legs are a little bit sore, on those easy running effort. Now, obviously, if you're going into a workout, it's a lot more, if you're doing like a speed workout, it will affect your performance more. But that's where turning your pace off, not worrying about your pace, and only focusing on time and effort can help you balance all of that. It can help you, incorporate the things that you need to incorporate it without kind of being that mental roadblock of, but my run was at, an 8-minute pace instead of a 7:30 pace. You don't even know. Maybe you look at it afterwards, but it's not affecting kind of what you're doing. Because there's often times where, you might have, sore legs or something like that as you're running, but sometimes it helps flush it out if you're running easy enough. And then your body does adapt. So, if you are consistently incorporating it in, you're not going to be as sore, as you progress. And then you're able to schedule it creatively. I personally like to keep my clients and myself, my hard days hard. So if I'm doing like a harder running workout, I actually like to lift afterwards, although that can take away a little bit from the aesthetic gains because you're kind of already worn down a little bit from your running. So there's pros and cons, certainly, but you can get creative with your scheduling, and you might not, be in the weight room 5 days a week. If you're in intense, like peak marathon training, you might be able to just do 1, 2, or 3 days. So it's finding that balance within your schedule as well.
And that is like a key point. Your progression is going to change, right? Like you might be not in race season for running, so therefore you're going to focus a little bit more on lifting, and maybe even put that first in the day so it gets the prioritization that it needs. However, if you are trying to train speed, you don't want to go into a speed workout fatigued, so you're not going to want to lift beforehand because you're going to be training slowness. So it's learning what phase of the year you're in, what's your priority for that, and then prioritizing the things that matter. But also, I think where some of the constant soreness comes into play is not having that clear progression. And you touched on that. I've scheduled out everything so that I know what I'm doing so that the body does adapt. If someone were to be looking to start to schedule in like training, what could be a way that they might start to include strength workouts with their runs?
Sure. Yeah, I think I mean, especially if you're a beginner runner as well, it's a little bit easier because if you're a beginner runner, you should primarily just be doing the easy subaerobic threshold running anyway. And then you could almost even sometimes I even have them prioritize their lifts first. So because you want to save kind of depending on your priority, you want to save the most amount of energy and the most amount of effort for that. So if you're new to running and you're just kind of getting your feet wet in that area, I actually prefer them to lift first and then potentially go in there into their run or even split it, different parts of the day. So that can be helpful. But if you are more experienced, it's really about your schedule and how much time block you have, whether it be, you're doing your intense workout and then you're going straight into a lift or potentially splitting it up. Either way can work really well. It's really just meeting you where you're at on any given day, on any given week. And that's where the effort comes into play. So kind of a little bit of our whole theme is like, you don't need to be in this cycle of grind and grit and constantly pushing like the way we think it is, like where we're just like dripping sweat and we're sprinting and we're going hard all the time, running and in the weight room and all of that. That's not where you're going to see the benefit. But it is challenging to sit down, at the beginning of every month or, the beginning of each week and plan out your schedule and figure out when you're going to fuel, figure out when you're going to go easy, when are you going to go hard. Like that is where the effort, you're going to be better served at putting your effort in that way, as opposed to kind of the stereotypical, like, I'm not working hard enough because I'm not dripping sweat after my run kind of thing.
It's trusting in that plan and having that plan in place so that you can meet yourself where you're constantly at, I think is really the big thing that I've taken away from everything that you've said.
Yeah, definitely. It's the plan is the biggest piece from every perspective, both aesthetic goals and performance goals.
And so in closing thoughts to help everybody, so we touched on, the fact that you've got to include those easy runs. You've got to focus on your fueling, not just for aesthetic goals, but also for improving that performance. And protein and both carbs are very key for maintaining lean muscle mass, making sure that you're fueled. Eating more is also another hard thing I think that we need to embrace. And then you have to do that strength work. You have to get into the gym because it's going to help you do more of what you love. Any other closing mistakes that you've really see runners making often, or closing tips, especially if someone is starting out and trying to find their balance?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of kind of excuses, for lack of a better term, that I hear, or quotes that I hear often, kind of on all three of those main themes that we've touched on. But the one I want to kind of highlight is that I always hear is, but it's hard to fuel. Like, it's hard to fuel right after a run, or it's hard to fuel during a run. And I get it, because especially if you're training intensely, or if you've just come in the door and you're tired, and oftentimes you're not hungry. You're not hungry for a reason, because your body's not, it's prioritizing performance, it's prioritizing kind of survival at that point, because maybe you just put it through a 2 hour long run. So it has kind of shut down some of your digestion, some of your other processes temporarily, to focus on that. So your hunger hormones, ghrelin is suppressed, leptin, your kind of hormone that makes you feel full, that's changing. Kind of all of that has changed right in that moment. And that's where, again, it's hard. Like, it doesn't seem like it would be difficult to, eat right when you walk in the door, but it can be, but you've got to do it. Like, you've kind of got to make that a priority if you do want to focus on your body composition. And if you do want to kind of get all the benefits of that training that you do. So whether that means, having your post-run meal or snack kind of ready for you on the counter. You don't know how many times I've eaten like an RX bar in the shower. I know that sounds weird, but it is what it is. That's what I have to do sometimes so that, I can immediately get fuel in. So it's kind of back to what we were talking about before, like, doing the hard things, but they're different than what you would think that they would be. Working on that gut training so that you can increase the calories that you can take in during your run, eating right after. The gym can be intimidating for runners. Getting in the gym or working out from lifting from home, it doesn't have, like, you can make accommodations for yourself and for your lifestyle, but kind of getting yourself out of your comfort zone, I would say, and kind of retraining and reframing some of those excuses that runners love to throw around, especially like but it's hard to run slow. That's another one that I hear a lot that we kind of need to reframe.
It's also understanding, and this goes back to a little bit the intuitive eating part of it, that intuitive and listening to our body means that our mind is interpreting things. And unfortunately, our mind doesn't always interpret things the way it needs to interpret, which is where having that plan so that you have something to hold you accountable, where you've even scheduled in easy runs, you've scheduled in your other workouts, you've scheduled in how you're going to fuel, can help you make sure that you're staying on track when your mind and body might not be communicating necessarily on the same page at all times.
Exactly. I mean, intuitive running, intuitive eating, like awesome concept, right? But running, 26.2 miles isn't really an intuitive thing. Like it's really hard on your body and you're dealing with a lot of physiological and metabolic things that, yeah, that connection isn't always there. Now, your body, your cues and stuff will start to change. Like you'll start to notice it for years and years and years and years. I could never eat right after I ran. But then as soon as I started, focusing on that, making it a priority and really, really increasing my calories and all of that stuff, now I'm like starving right after I finish running because my body, it knows that it needs it. And that cue has kind of shifted.
I love that because I think it takes a time to retrain our body and mind to communicate on some of those things. And so embracing that process is just so key.
Definitely. Yeah, exactly. And just the plan and all of those pieces are kind of part of the plan. And it seems overwhelming at first because we have so many different things we kind of need to check off, but it's finding those priorities and then they become easier and easier and easier. And then you don't even really think about it at some point.
And then you can start checking off more and more and see the opportunity and all the different options out there.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Pamela. There's so many helpful tips to help runners really dial in their nutrition, embrace those easy runs, and even get into that strength work. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about fueling your performance, even fueling for outside goals that you might have. So whether you're an endurance athlete, that's your main priority, you love your running, and you also want to lose weight, build muscle, have an aesthetic goal, or you're even getting into running partly because you also want to see aesthetic changes, I do want to talk about the importance of fueling. So often tracking comes up when we're just talking about weight loss. But even if you have no aesthetic goals as a runner, you're just trying to only focus on improving your performance, you need to track how you're consuming or what you're consuming. We track our runs, right? We track, maybe the pace that you're doing, the tempos that you're doing, how things felt. You're tracking all this data so that you can improve, right? You don't just randomly go out and run a distance one day and then hope that stringing together different runs leads to you being able to do that marathon. No, you have a strategic plan in place and your diet should match that plan. One of the main things I do with my runners is look at what their mileage is going to be over the weeks as they're increasing their mileage to end up at that race. And we go through and say, okay, each of these weeks, we're going to do this amount of calories. We're going to even spike them on these days. We're going to do these macros, right? You want to be tracking to make sure that your fueling is helping your performance, not hindering it. So if you've ever thought, well, tracking is just for weight loss, it's just for aesthetic goals, it is not. It is even more key the more precise you want to be in terms of improving your performance. So the more advanced an athlete you are, the more you need to track your fueling because it's going to impact your performance and you're to the 1% differences, right? You can maybe even adjust your post-workout meal timing, your pre-workout meal timing to really see an impact. So if you are trying to improve your performance, you need to track. If you're trying to also reach an aesthetic goal, it's really key you track. And I do want to step back here and say, you need to have one primary focus. So if you're training for a race and you want to lose weight, train for that race first and, do different things that could help promote optimal body composition, but focus on that performance for that race. And then afterwards, maybe say, hey, now that I'm not training exactly for this race, I'm going to focus a little bit more on my aesthetic goals. So you have to have that primary focus. It doesn't mean that you can't work on things together. And by tracking our food, we can do things more precisely, but you do have to have a primary focus. Okay. But if you're tracking your food, you can make sure that you're doing everything you need to make sure you're retaining lean muscle mass and that you're also not gaining unwanted fat as you are increasing your mileage because that isn't going to help your performance. While, we think of aesthetic goals only as for aesthetic reasons, when we have more ideal body composition, when we have more lean muscle, this does improve our performance. So track what you're currently doing for your fueling to get a good idea of a starting point, okay? Because you don't want to make dramatic changes because if you cut your carbs drastically or you increase your protein drastically, that's going to set back how you're sort of fueling and that's going to change your energy source, which is going to impact your run. So if you're in an off season and maybe prepared for that while working towards aesthetic goals, okay, maybe you make a bigger change. But if you are training for a race, make sure you're really meeting yourself where you're at. And in terms of nutrition for our performance, we often talk about carbs when it comes to fueling endurance sports. And carbs are super key. They not only are that instant fuel that we need for our runs, especially when we are going to be running for longer, we need to make sure that we have full stores, but they're also protein sparing, okay? They help protect our lean muscle mass when we are doing a more catabolic activity. So we do want to make sure that we're consuming more carbs, that we have our glycogen stores full. However, people go a little crazy with the carb loading before a race. You only have so much that you can actually store. And the more muscle you have, the more you can store. Therefore, another reason to step back sometimes and embrace being a little sore and maybe detrimentally impacting, having a little negative impact on your runs during an off season to actually start that strength work, because the more muscle you have, the more glycogen you can actually store in your muscle tissue. So win-win, right? Stronger for your runs and you're storing more glycogen. But you can only store so much. So we get a little obsessed with the carb loading and we don't need to be quite as focused on that as we are. However, you do want to make sure that if you are doing your long runs and you want optimal performance, while you might have trained yourself to do fasted training, or you might have trained yourself to work off of fewer calories, that's not necessarily ideal. So potentially starting to change those patterns could be really key, and making sure you're getting enough carbs. But also do not forget the importance of protein. Protein is going to help you build lean muscle mass from your strength workouts. It's going to help you retain that lean muscle mass during a more catabolic activity. And it's going to help make sure that you also use the carbs when you really need them. And it can even be that instant fuel when you need, instead of going into your muscle mass as fuel. Because we're going to try and reserve fat stores as much as we can, which is kind of weird. And it's a body mechanism of survival, which hinders our weight loss results at times, especially when we cut our calories super low. But that's why even having that protein and those amino acids is so key. We do want to make sure we're getting them. So in terms of talking about ratios here, I did want to give you some general guidelines to really help. With my endurance athletes, I usually like to try and get them to 30% protein. Maybe not race week, but during, strength workouts, when we're increasing mileage, that 30% protein minimum is super key. If you are potentially in a phase where your mileage is a little bit down, you really are focusing on those muscle gains, you might even want to think about 40% protein or going up towards that, but 30% protein is that high protein intake. It's going to be very beneficial. Then you want to think about at least 40% of your calories coming from carbs. That's a good place to start. As you increase your mileage, and this is where tracking comes into play because we can adjust as our workouts change, you're going to be going up towards that 50% carb minimum. If you are currently, though, way far away from any of these things, when you look at your calories and you look at your overall macro breakdown of the portion of the calories, don't make dramatic changes because that's going to impact your workouts. Make small adjustments to really see how you can meet yourself where you're at, okay? And then no, one size doesn't fit all. And the more we are adjusting based on what we're currently doing, the better off we're going to be. But the key is making sure that you understand that you can adjust your nutrition based on how your training is changing, and also that you can use the tracking and these macro breakdowns to not only fuel your performance, but see the aesthetic changes that you want. Too often we think that these goals can't work together, and it's because we're not giving ourselves all the data. When you just think calories in versus calories out, you are going to be hungry. You are going to end up dropping your calories too low. That's going to negatively impact your performance and not even lead to the weight loss results you want. Macros really matter for that body recomp if we want to feel full and fueled and see the best performance while also potentially achieving any aesthetic goals we want. So again, while you want to focus on carbs, and even if, keto is all the craze right now and you think low carb for weight loss and you want to lose weight, don't necessarily think if you are doing a lot of endurance training that you need to go low carb. Going higher carb might be beneficial, but protein might be the missing component. So consider trying to bump your protein intake to about 30% of your calories. That's a great place to start to not only fuel your performance, but see those aesthetic changes, building lean muscle and losing fat. But please, guys, embrace the tracking. It goes back to doing some of the things we don't like to do more of what we love and see even improvements in what we love so we can do more of our passion and pursue it to the fullest potential, okay? But start tracking, embrace that protein a little bit more, but do not forget about the importance of macros, whether you want to fuel your performance or see those aesthetic changes. So I want to talk about mobility work to keep you healthy so that you can run further, faster, and not get injured, because common injuries are plantar fasciitis, knee pain, hip pain, IT band issues, hamstring strains, right? All these things that are really annoying that don't allow us to do more of what we love. So there's two joints I really want you to focus on when you're doing your mobility work. And this 3-part prehab process can be included prior to your runs. If you do want to see video demonstrations of any of the moves and you're listening to the podcast, please check the YouTube video because I am going to run through these. But you want to make sure you're focusing on two joints, the hip and the ankle most of the time. And the reason why is the knee is often injured because it's caught between those two things. Like while there can be structural things like meniscus tears and such that happen at the knee, a lot of time that overload is a result of either ankle mobility or stability issues or hip mobility or stability issues, which is why we're going to focus most of our attention right now on these two things. But this full prehab process can be included as part of your warm-up. It can be just broken down into 10 minutes. Just focus on the areas or muscles that are tight for you, mobilizing those joints. But it can also be part of the recovery workouts you do and the warm-up you do for your strength work as well. We have to think less as like a full session of recovery necessarily and more as frequent little bouts, because those consistent like ways of changing our recruitment patterns and improving our movements are so key to reverse all the sitting and even the repetitive movement of running and address any compensations we might have. So think less in terms of full recovery workouts even with this and more as part of your warm-up before your run, including these things. So starting at the hip, one of the things I wanted to touch on was the hamstring. So your hamstrings can often feel tight, and this doesn't mean they're in need of stretching. What often happens because we spend so much time seated, whether it's in a car, whether or not it's at our desk, is we end up with anterior pelvic tilt or even an overstretching of our hamstrings. And this can lead to them becoming synergistically dominant for our glutes, so they work when our glutes should during our running gait. Also, it can mean that they're stretched overly lengthened and stretched, which is what can lead to hamstring strains. So you can take a ball up on a bench and you're actually going to sit on the ball. You can work all the way from under your butt, and when you work under your butt, you might even want to push it sort of up under your glute to get to the deep external rotators and that hamstring origin that can often be injured, and we can see like tendinopathies there and tendinitis and such. So think about pushing it up on your butt as you start, and then even lifting your leg out in front of you and relaxing, because you're going to want to tense and relax the muscle. So you can even curl a little bit to tense against it and then relax as well. But you want to think about stretching it against the ball a little bit too. But you can work all the way down the back of your hamstring, and you want to hold, okay? So when we think foam rolling, you see people roll really quickly. That doesn't help the muscle relax and release. You actually want to hold tension on the muscle and then breathe in as you apply that pressure. So it's like when you get a deep tissue massage, you want to relax as they're holding. If you're tensing against it, it's too much pressure and you need to reduce it. But you can use a ball, again, extending the leg out, relaxing back, even flexing a little bit and then relaxing. But work all the way down the back of your leg. You can work out from the side of your leg towards more medial, towards your adductors, but you want to think about holding on any spots you find. The first time you might move a little bit more quickly to find any tight spots, and then you can sort of go to those on other times, but you want to hold on any spots you find that are tight. If you don't have a bench, if you don't have a ball, if the ball is too much pressure, you can use a roller as well. Just know that using the roller isn't going to apply as much pressure, and if you do use it off the ground, you have to hold yourself up a little bit more versus being able to relax and just sit on the bench. But you want to focus as much as you can on one side at a time, because you might even find that you only have tight spots on one side, and that's okay to just address those. You don't have to spend time on areas that aren't tight. So hamstring rolling can be really key instead of stretching more, which can try and or actually result in injury because it's stretching an overstretched muscle. So you're basically taking a rubber band that's already pulled tight and stretching it further. That's what leads to it sometimes breaking, right? So you don't want to do that. Second, so you always want to think foam roll, stretch, and activate when you're doing this, because you're foam rolling to relax and release overly active muscles. You're then stretching to mobilize joints, and then we're activating to keep that stretching process in place while getting that underactive muscle working to stabilize the joint as well. So with this stretch, you're both going to activate your glute a little bit, but also stretch out your hip. So you're going to pull one knee into your chest as you lie back on a bench, and you're going to tuck the other knee in and then squeeze the glute to extend the hip. So by activating your glute and squeezing your glute, you're extending and stretching that hip flexor. So this is sort of a double whammy where when you're stretching, you do want to also think about activating. However, the primary focus isn't activating, it's on feeling that stretch. So you're going to tuck it back in, and then you're going to extend that foot back down, squeezing the glute. You want your butt right on the edge of that bench as you're doing this movement, okay? If you don't have a bench, you can do a standing quad stretch. However, if you're doing this basic standing quad stretch, make sure you're actually squeezing your glute. So the quad stretch comes into play by that knee flexion, okay? But also the hip stretch comes into play by squeezing the glute here and that hip extended. If you keep your hip flexed, you're not actually stretching your hip flexors. And only fun fact is only one of the quad muscles actually connects at the hip. Otherwise, they're involved in that knee extension. So the final move is three-way hip circles that I wanted to go over. Again, foam rolling, stretching, and then activation. When you're doing these, you can also do these standing. You could do them with your hand on the bench, but you want to think about kicking back, keeping the hips level. Okay, so you're working on that glute max there, then bringing the knee out to the side, so the glute medius or that hip stabilizer, and then you're using your abs to actually tuck the knee forward and engage that hip flexor just a little bit. So these are all the things that promote hip stability and that core stability when you are in that running gait. If you are doing this off the ground, you can not only do a straight leg kick back, but you can even do a donkey kick. Again, don't rotate open. You want to stop the move almost with your glute to engage that glute max. Lift it out to the side and don't rotate open because that's where you can get your piriformis or your TFL compensating. But straight lift out to the side, don't get ego in the range of motion. Think about even lifting the knee a little bit because often we'll let the knee rotate in and that's where the TFL takes over. So that lateral raise out to work the side of the butt and then that tuck in engaging those abs. Because that's what's gonna create the hip stability so that we aren't seeing our hips go like this when we're running. We actually have that stability on that single leg. Makes for a much more efficient running gait. It helps make sure that we're actually using our glutes properly so we're not gonna end up with hamstring issues or IT band issues or knee issues, okay? The next move, as I said, you want to mention or work on two specific joints, the hip and the ankle, okay? So the peroneal is one of those muscles that can become tight. It is this muscle down the outside of the lower leg. Okay, that's where we can see ankle issues. It can even lead to hip issues, or there can be tension into that lower leg because of the TFL compensating. So we want to address this and help improve our ankle mobility because that's so important to an efficient running gait. So pressing down into the ball on the ground, you can circle the foot as you hold, but you want it in the outside of that lower leg. And you can work from where there's that little bone right there all the way down to your ankle bone. You want to focus mostly in the medial part of the lower leg. And if this is too much pressure, you can always use like a little block or books and put the ball up on it underneath that lower leg as you press down. And again, circling to tense and relax, holding on any spots you find. We're working down the outside of that lower leg to really make sure that you're helping improve your ankle mobility because you want to be able to not only plantar flex or point your toe, but draw that shin up toward, or that toe up toward your shin because that dorsiflexion is so key to that efficient running gait, okay? So peroneal foam rolling would be the first thing you want to start with your ankles, then a bear squat to foot stretch. And this can be really good to do without shoes on too, because we often forget how locked up our big toe can be, which you wouldn't think is that important, but it's really important to that stability, that ground impact, that transfer of force. So you want to sit back on your heels with your toes tucked under, then your hands will go down in front, you'll drive your heels down. Again, this is working on that dorsiflexion or the ability to draw your toes up towards your shins. Now, if you're thinking, Corey, that's all well and good, but I can't kneel down like that, you can always do a more knee-friendly version, either using a stair, a block, or whatever, by putting the ball of your foot up on that and then driving your knee forward to work on that dorsiflexion or the ability to pull the toe up towards the shin. You're not having your knee go past your toe, which can be a lot more knee-friendly, okay? So you can always do that as well as you even do a little big toe stretching, okay? So you can take your foot off for that. But you want to think about that bear squat to foot stretch to work on the foot and ankle mobility. We often ignore these things, but they are our first point of contact. They are our foundation. They are what transfer the force and make sure that we're actually loading correctly, okay? And we're even able to activate our glutes better if we have that better connection to the ground, okay? The last move, and I like to do this off a stair, plate weight, you can use the block, but you want to even come over to a wall for that extra stability. So yes, we can just use the calf raise off the ground, but this isn't actually strengthened through the fullest range of motion. And when we're doing all this mobility work, the only way we maintain it is if we actually strengthen through the full range of motion. So if you're like doing all this hip mobility work and then you're going in the gym and squatting these half squats, you're going to tighten everything back up. So when we're thinking about doing the calf raises, you'll want to stand on the block, step, okay, even on a plate weight, and you can let that heel sort of come off so that you get that extended range of motion, and then you can push up off of it, okay, that extended range of motion, and then you can push up off of it, okay? And so I'm working on one side at a time. You can do both sides, but I want to hold that block in place so I don't kill myself. And I'm going to drop the heel all the way down and then press back up, okay? Just sort of keeping the other ball of the foot on there, but I'm working on going through a bigger range of motion than I would off the ground. You can also do just a toe raise to the heel raise. So off the ground, if you don't have something nearby or you're outside, if you even just dorsiflexion, bring the toes up towards the shin and then come up, that's at least going to get that little extra work in to help you improve that ankle mobility. But the more you can strengthen through that full range of motion, the better off you're going to be. The final note I want to make, because I did focus a lot on the lower body, and while the lower body does get a lot of impact, running is a full core, full body movement. We want that proper transfer of force through our core and that efficient contralateral movement, or using the opposite upper body and lower body together. So that sling through our core is super important to focus on. And if our lats are tight, not functioning correctly, we're not going to have that proper transfer of force between our upper and lower body. Our lat and glute are really connected through that thoracolumbar fascia, or like our lower back area. And so if our lats are tight or not functioning correctly, we can have SI joint issues. Our glutes won't really function as well as they should. We can end up with shoulder pain, hip pain, all that jazz. So we have to remember that even though we often think of running a lot for our lower body, there is an important upper body and core aspect to it. So I do just want to pay attention to the lats a little bit. If you turn your palm up towards the ceiling as you sort of roll your lat, you can rock backwards and forwards, working all the way up to that armpit and the back of the armpit, all the way down slightly towards the bottom of your rib cage, rocking back and forth to find a tight spot and then moving the arm. This way you're going to stretch out the lats to help really make sure that you're keeping your upper and lower body, healthy and happy, and you have that proper transfer of force through your core as well. So don't ignore your upper body, even if you're a runner. It's super, super key, and you want to think about how you can create that efficient transfer of force. But those are some great moves to include in your mobility work as part of your warm-up routine, even as part of your warm-up routine before your lifting sessions, to make sure that you're promoting that optimal gait, that healthy running gait. Being able to run further, faster is so key. And this little bit of extra work, even just 5 to 10 minutes, can really pay off to keep you doing more of what you love. So for all of my crazy, wonderful endurance athletes and runners and newbie runners who are looking to not only improve their performance but reach aesthetic goals, hopefully these macro tips, these mobility tips, Pamela's amazing tips, all helped you really find ways to now see opportunity in doing some of the things you maybe don't like as much to do more of what you love.